Okay, all right. Thank you, Daniel, for joining me and sharing your views. Russian and US officials will be meeting in Istanbul on Thursday to discuss normalizing embassy operations, the State Department has said. The talks will focus solely on the functioning of the respective embassies and will not include political or security issues such as the war in Ukraine. The Russian delegation will be led by Ambassador Alexander Darchiev, and the US team will be headed by Deputy Assistant Secretary of State Sonata Coulter. Listen in to what Tammy Bruce, the US State Department spokesperson, said.
On April 10th, Russian delegations for a second time in Istanbul, some further stabilizing the operations of our bilateral mission. That is happening in Istanbul. There are no political or security issues on the agenda. Ukraine is not, absolutely not on the agenda. These talks are solely focused on our embassy operation, normalizing overall, which we've noted in Russia and Ukraine.
Urged citizens to stay away from war zones after Ukrainian President Volodymyr claimed that there were two Chinese nationals who were captured fighting for Russia. All such claims, Chinese soldiers were fighting in Ukraine, calling the allegations groundless to the Chinese person.
保护危机问题上的清晰的、明确的，得到国际社会中方危机问题所做的作用。
In yet another development, Ukraine has reported at least 21 injured after Russia launched 55 drones in an overnight attack. This comes as Russia claims it is pushing the last of Ukraine's forces out of Kursk region towards the border. Additionally, the acting U.S. ambassador to the United Nations said that U.S. will not tolerate bad faith negotiations on Ukraine, demanding that Russia honor commitments to a ceasefire. Joining me on the telecast right now is Micah Pickers. Micah, thanks for joining us. And my first question to you about the charges that have been leveled against China by the Ukrainian president, that there were Chinese nationals that were operating on the soil of Ukraine, fighting the war of the Russians against Ukraine. What do you make of that?
It's certainly an interesting development. It wouldn't shock me on the one hand. We're still waiting for the dust to settle, but I would point to the fact that there was a very, very heavy North Korean participation in the war on the Russian side. So the fact that that sort of axis of countries which do have deep ties with one another may be participating is not entirely shocking, but I also, it makes sense that Beijing would deny it outright.
Okay, and talking about the strikes and counter-strikes and the claims and counter-claims being made by the Ukrainians and the Russians about each striking the other territory, how do we know what is propaganda, what is a narrative that is being built by each of the nations, and do you think the talks that happened in Saudi Arabia came to any fruition, keeping in mind the war continues?
Yeah, so two questions that are really good questions. The first question I'd respond to, I would say, I think it's important to look for the sorts of institutions that are particularly good at cutting through the noise and getting to the basis of things. So I would point to the Institute for the Study of War here in Washington, D.C. They've been doing some incredible work on tracking the Ukraine conflict since its inception, and they're using a lot of open source material. And they just have a very, very robust, incredible process for the way that they develop their analyses. So that would be one source I would point people towards if they really want to find, a really solid overview of what's happening on a daily basis. As far as the talks in Riyadh that you mentioned, it's really hard to tell, right? On the balance of things, it doesn't look like much has been accomplished. We know Trump is very insistent on wanting this war to come to a close. And on the one hand, it seems like Putin has signaled he also is interested on it, but his words and his actions aren't exactly lining up, right? As you mentioned, the war still continues, and yet there continues to be this tit for tat exchange with strikes and a lot of pointing fingers. So I think the bottom line is that this war is going to be much harder to end than Trump thought it would be.
Right. And what do you make of the delegation level talks that are going to take place in Istanbul later on? That's happening tomorrow between the Russians and the Americans. Do you think that the issue with regards to the ceasefire deal that at this point of time is hanging in balance will be discussed? And do you think anything fruitful will come out of it?
So actually, I'm cautiously optimistic about this. The folks that both Darchiev and Coulter and Bruce, who have spoken to press, have been pretty clear that they're not going to be trying to discuss broader political or security topics like Ukraine. And so, in some sense, I'm actually slightly, like I said, cautiously optimistic that maybe there will be some normalization going on here. And the reason I say that is because Trump has signaled from the outset that he would like some sort of normalization and rapprochement with Russia. And the sticking point has been the Russia-Ukraine war, but sort of trying to drill down a few levels deeper and to find things that maybe don't necessarily need to involve Ukraine at the moment. That seems to be the Trump administration's angle. And I think if Ukraine is not being discussed, I think therefore productive discussions. Who's to say what that will look actually entail? Is anybody's best guess? What I will say, however, is if they said broader political security topics like Ukraine aren't going to come up. Then we're looking at a totally different kettle of fish. I think if that happens, I would be shocked if Russia was said well, you, the United you want going to bring these things up? And then you brought things up. And things fall apart. So there's definitely a very sort of high risk, high reward thing where it could fall apart at any minute. Um, if a topic, a sensitive topic like Ukraine were to be brought up, when it was not supposed to be on the table to begin with, if that makes
You think President Trump would have thought it to be such an uphill battle, because as soon as he came to he said and very decisively that I'm going to end the war. It looked it seemed as if he thought it to be a cakewalk, but it clearly isn't.
I think it's judged the just how deeply entrenched this conflict is, and we have to remember that this conflict is much deeper than something that began in 2022 or 2014. there's a lot of history there, and that history has then been compounded by such as the fact that this war has now been stretching on for 3 years. And that's not something you get out of overnight. That doesn't, you could have the best diplomats in the world, the best deal maker. He loves to call himself a deal maker. World on this, and you are still going to find that there are sticking points, and that both sides are going to be unwilling to compromise to a certain extent because they have certain goals, right? Ukraine does not want to give up territory, and Russia wants to be able to say that it is, beaten back the Ukrainians and is reconstituting the old Soviet Union. Right there are really, really antithetical at play in the Kremlin and what's going on in Kyiv. And then the U.S. perspective on all this is, well, we just want the war to stop. And what we've seen is a very sort of foreign policy, right? We're demanding the mineral deal from the Ukrainians. It's not entirely clear what accomplished, but the bottom line, very astutely, is that and that mistrenched.
All right, thank you. And on that note, I'm out of time for watching news, and this is all on.